This ministry was inspired by God showing me that I am a preacher in 10 buildings each for 20,000 people each in one city where I preach 10 different sermons in one day. This is great.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a claim you hear pretty much everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Which one's that?
You know the one? The Bible's been changed so many times we just can't trust it anymore. You see it on social media and memes, even in, well, more serious discussions sometimes.
Right. That idea, it's definitely out there. People hear copy of a copy of a copy, and they think of that game of telephone, don't they?
Exactly. Like the message must have gotten totally garbled over, centuries.
And that's the assumption we really want to dig into today. Does that idea actually hold up when you look at the evidence? That's the mission for this deep dive.
Precisely. So the big question is, has the Bible really been changed over time? Changed so much that it's unreliable? We're going to unpack that, look at the manuscripts, the discoveries, what the scholars actually say.
And I think you might find the answers, pretty surprising, actually.
Because when you start looking into it,
Yeah, what's fascinating is that the Bible kind of stands out. It's actually, believe it or not, the most well-preserved ancient text in all of history.
okay, that's a big statement, most
Yeah.
well-preserved. So for people listening, what does that actually mean in practice? What's the evidence?
Yeah.
Like, maybe give us a comparison. How does the Bible stack up against other really important ancient writings, say Plato or Homer's Iliad? How many copies do we have? How old are they?
That's a really crucial comparison to make. Okay, so for most classical works, Plato, Aristotle, Homer, like you said, we often have maybe, a handful of manuscripts, sometimes just 10 or 20.
Okay.
And often the earliest copies we have were written down maybe 1,000 years, sometimes more, after the original was composed. Think about that gap.
1,000 years. That's a long time for errors to creep in.
It is. Now, compare that to the New Testament. We have over 5,800 Greek manuscripts, not 10 or 20. Over 5,800.
Wow. 5,800.
And here's the kitcher. Some of these manuscripts date back to the 2nd century AD,
The 2nd century. So really close to when the originals were written.
just decades after in some cases, maybe a century or so for others.
Yeah.
It's unparalleled. It gives us this incredible window back to the very early text. Far less uncertainty than for almost any other ancient book.
That's a stark difference.
Oh,
Okay, so that's the New Testament.
Yeah.
What about the Old Testament?
Yeah.
It's even older, right?
Yeah.
How does its preservation compare?
right. Good question. For a long time, the situation looked a bit different for the Old Testament. Our oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts were from around the 10th century AD, so still a significant gap.
Okay, so a later starting point for the copies we had.
Exactly. But then came the Dead Sea Scrolls. That discovery in the 1940s was just a complete game changer.
Ah, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Everyone's heard of them, but what exactly did they show us about the Old Testament text?
Well, these scrolls, found in caves near the Dead Sea, they contain portions of almost every book of the Old Testament. And the incredible thing, they dated back to the centuries before Jesus' time.
So suddenly, we had copies that were 1,000 years older than what we primarily relied on before.
1,000 years older, instantly. It was revolutionary for scholarship.
So the big reveal. When scholars compared these ancient scrolls to the 10th century AD texts they already had, what did they find? Was it radically different?
That's the truly remarkable part. They found they matched almost perfectly. The level of agreement was astonishing.
Almost perfectly. So there were some differences.
Oh, sure, there are differences, what scholars call textual variants. But we're talking overwhelmingly about things like spelling variations, like color versus color.
Okay, minor stuff.
Exactly. Or slight changes in word order that don't affect the meaning in Hebrew. Small grammatical points. Things you'd absolutely expect when texts are copied by hand over centuries. But the core message, the substance, it was the same.
That's fascinating. But let's dig into that idea of change and variance a bit more, because that's often where people get tripped up, right?
Absolutely.
If there are variants, even minor ones, how can scholars be so confident that the essential message hasn't been altered? What's the process? It sounds like serious detective work.
It really is. It's a whole field of study called textual criticism. And it's not just guesswork. It's a very sophisticated discipline.
Okay.
Think of it like forensic science for ancient texts. Scholars meticulously compare all these thousands of manuscripts. They analyze every single difference, however small. They look for patterns, identify likely scribal habits or errors. Maybe a scribe skipped a line or misspelled a word.
Right, trying to figure out what was most likely the original reading.
Exactly. They weigh the evidence from different manuscript families, considering the age and reliability of the copies. And based on all that, they reconstruct the text that has the highest probability of being the original.
And what's the consensus from all this work? Do these variants actually change core beliefs?
That's the key point. The overwhelming consensus among textual critics, and this includes many secular scholars who aren't approaching it from a faith perspective, is that while variants exist, they don't fundamentally affect core Christian doctrines.
Can you give an example? Maybe someone scholars respect.
Sure. Take Bart Ehrman. He's a very prominent New Testament textual critic, quite skeptical in his views, and he often highlights textual problems.
Right, I've heard of it.
Yet even he has stated quite clearly, and I'm quoting him loosely here, but the gist is accurate, that essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament.
So even a critical scholar acknowledges the core message isn't changed by these variations.
Precisely. From a purely historical academic standpoint, the main story, the key teachings, the claims about Jesus, the laws, the promises, they remain stable and clear despite these minor textual issues. It really shifts the ground, you know? The question isn't so much, can we trust the text was preserved? It's more, what does this incredibly well-preserved text actually say?
Okay, that addresses the manuscript copying process. But what about translation? That's another hurdle people bring up, isn't it? Oh, it's been translated so many times.
Ah, yes, the translation objection. That's another really common misconception.
It sounds like the game of telephone idea applied to languages.
Exactly. People imagine English Bibles are translations of, say, Latin, which is a translation of Greek, maybe going back further, like a chain losing meaning at each step.
But that's not how it works.
No, absolutely not. Modern Bible translations aren't based on previous translations. Reputable translation teams, committees of scholars, actually work for years directly from the original languages.
So they go straight back to the source.
Straight back to the best available Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek manuscripts, the very ones we've been discussing, reconstructed through textual criticism.
So different English versions like the NIV or ESV or King James, they aren't copies of each other.
No. They represent different teams going back to the same original language texts and making scholarly judgments about how best to render those ancient words and phrases into contemporary English. That's why you see slight differences in wording between translations. They reflect different translation philosophies, perhaps aiming for more word-for-word precision versus thought-for-thought clarity.
But the underlying message.
The underlying message, the core narratives, the theology, you can pick up several different modern translations and see for yourself how remarkably consistent they are, because they all stem from that same incredibly well-attested source text.
Okay, so if the manuscript evidence is strong and modern translations go back to the original languages, why is this idea that the Bible's been changed beyond recognition still so persistent? It seems to have real staying power.
That's a great question. I think there are a few reasons. Part of it is, well, maybe just unfamiliarity with the evidence we've been talking about.
It's easier to repeat a catchy phrase than to look into manuscript history, I suppose.
It definitely is. There's also sometimes a misunderstanding of what scholarly debate means. People might hear about textual variants being discussed by academics and assume that discussion means the whole text is unreliable.
Instead of seeing it as a sign of rigorous study.
Exactly. They mistake scholarly scrutiny and refinement for fundamental uncertainty. Then there can sometimes be agendas involved, people wanting to dismiss the text for other reasons. And, you know, sometimes people confuse interpretation of the Bible, which is certainly varied and evolved, with the text itself changing. Those are two very different things.
Right. How we understand it versus what it actually says.
Precisely. But the core finding from textual history is clear.
So, to kind of wrap this part up, what's the bottom line?
The bottom line is that the Bible has not been changed beyond recognition, not even close. We can be remarkably confident that the text we have today is extremely close to what the original authors wrote.
Extremely close. And that means the core messages are intact.
Absolutely. The message of salvation, you know, the story of Jesus's life, death, resurrection, the laws given through Moses, the promises of God throughout Scripture. These foundational elements are reliably preserved. They haven't been lost or distorted over time.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? how easily we can accept a sort of soundbite dismissal of something without actually checking the facts.
It does, and that leads to maybe a challenge for anyone listening.
With this,
Don't just take someone else's word for it, especially not a dismissal based on that old, unexamined claim we started with.
the change too many times idea.
Right. Don't let that be the reason you ignore it. Instead, why not engage with it directly?
Read it for yourself.
Read it for yourself. Ask tough questions. Dig into the evidence. Seek out reliable resources on its history and transmission.
Because the claim that it's hopelessly corrupted just doesn't seem to match the historical reality.
It doesn't. As we've seen in this deep dive, when you actually look at the manuscript evidence, the history, the scholarly work, the Bible holds up. It really does. Even under intense scrutiny, even under fire, it invites you to explore it, not dismiss it out of hand.
This ministry has been started and directed by God. Please take your part to support this ministry. Subscribe to this channel, press like, post a comment. Your help will be very much appreciated not only by me, but also by God, who will bless you. Thank you. Get the books provided by this ministry and also the course How to Get to the Highest Heaven. Yes, you read the course, believe it and get to the highest heaven. Please look in the description of this video.